They held interviews for architects in this schoolhouse. I had my projector and my slides, and I didn't know what to expect. The schoolroom was full of people, and they were all African Americans. And as I walked in through the door, there were two African American gentlemen standing at the door, and one said to the other, "Here we go again, another whitey." And so I got up on the stage and I said, "Well, I'm not just a whitey, I'm a South African." Well, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, this was at the height of apartheid. And then I said, I'd like anybody in this room to stand up who's been exiled from their country for the fight against racial injustice. And at that moment, a little old lady began to struggle out of her seat. And I thought, oh my God, she looked so fierce. Then she turned to everybody and she said, "We don't want to see any more slides. Every architect we've looked at is qualified. We found the man we want. We don't need to see his slides. We know he's qualified, he wouldn't be here." And we got the job.
David, as is well known, grew up in South Africa and was very upset with apartheid and was ultimately exiled from South Africa for his anti-apartheid activity. So he was very drawn to the United States because this was the period of the civil rights movement.
When I first came to Pittsburgh, I had a telephone call from the then superintendent of schools of the city of Pittsburgh. I'd only been here about 3 months. He called me up and he said, "You're the new professor of urban design at Carnegie Institute of Technology. We need your help."
And this was at the moment that the United States was under court orders to desegregate schools.
He said, "Go away for 2 weeks and come back and tell me how we begin." I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I had no understanding of American cities at all. Anyway, I came back and I had in my pocket one of those maps that you used to get from gas stations. And I spread it out on the floor. I said, "Get a swab, put it in your ink bottle, and throw it at random into the map. Say 4 or 5 times. Wherever those blots land, call a public meeting and ask the parents of students what kind of society they envision their children growing up into." He got up from behind his desk and walked out of the room. And 10 minutes later he walked back in and he said, "I've been on the telephone with the Ford Foundation in New York and you're to start immediately." So with my students, we began to hold little public meetings in the blots.
We never knew what was going to happen. Sometimes we'd have an angry mob who would be calmed down by the end of the meeting, and sometimes we start out with a calm group and they'd wind up being an angry mob.
Well, I don't think we did a very good job, except we all learned a great deal. And we developed a theory that the city all around us was a cloth, and that the cloth was whole in some parts, tattered in others, but if you pulled one of the threads, you'd pull the whole cloth with it. We called ourselves Urban Design Associates, with the idea that everybody, the public, the politicians, the specialists, the architects, were all associates in something called urban design. We started in the attic of my house. We had no money, so we started with a couple of carpenter's trestles and an old door. That was our drafting table. It's the way we began.
Urban design was something that nobody knew what it was. It was difficult starting a practice called Urban Design Associates because not only did no one know what it was, they certainly wouldn't pay for it as a service. So it was really almost creating a discipline. Our focus was to really understand cities, both by studying them physically and most importantly by engaging with people.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all...
It was immediately after the assassination of Martin Luther King. We were put into the Pontiac area of Detroit, where there'd been terrible riots. An African-American driver drove up to the gas station to refill his car, and he was shot dead by the white gasoline attendant. It was right at the intersection of these two battling communities. And that was the area that we chose. What would we put there that would bring these communities together? What common things did these communities have? We held public meetings. Some of the meetings were raucous and some of them were even violent. But we saw these passions as important. What is passion? Because we believe in something. Through a period of approximately 2.5 years, it emerged with a consensus, emerged with a building. It became the first education center that combined adult recreation, a health center, libraries, local administration, food services for the elderly. It was all highly innovative. We designed a center that was unlike anything that was there in the city. And today, if you visit it, it's in ruins. We built something that did not integrate into the community at all. It was very cubist. If we had our time over again, which none of us ever do, we would have spent time analyzing and understanding all the local vernaculars of architecture and scale and building and all the rest of it. We would have built a center which would have merged into the city. And that was a very big lesson that we began in Pontiac.
So in the early days, we had a lot of very good processes, but they were stormy very often. And they didn't always come to consensus. That is one of the prime reasons that we felt it was so important to develop this phased method of coming to consensus.
And we've evolved that into working sessions actually in the cities, which became known as design charrettes, where we'd actually take 5 or 6 people of our firm and spend a week in a particular city or neighborhood and actually work on the designs right there, real time. And that was something David practiced and preached and innovated all through his career.
We had reached a point where our approach was believed in by people. And the AIA was not particularly interested in it until a band of rabble-rousers, which included David Lewis and his great friend Jules Gregory, started promoting the idea.
And that's why, well, way back in the 60s, the American Institute of Architects started their RUDATs, Regional Urban Design Assistance Teams.
The thing that RUDAT did, which I think was really valuable, was it was interdisciplinary. It was about bringing an architect and a planner and an economist and a Lord knows what else together around a complex issue, and then putting people with all of these different perspectives into a kind of an intellectual pressure cooker.
So each person brought their skills and techniques and shared them openly in that process. David brought many of the techniques that we had worked so hard developing at Urban Design Associates.
We were a kind of laboratory animal, if you like. I brought the living experience of what we were doing in Pontiac and in Pittsburgh.
The RUDATs as an official AIA function meant that urban design was something that architects were actively engaged in, and it gave tremendous visibility for the profession of urban design.
When you think back to the 70s, there was really almost a sense of despair about American cities. Nothing had been invested in these cities for decades.
Because there was a whole school of thought that said we actually had to leave those old industrial cities behind. They were too polluted, they were too expensive, and move to the next greenfield, to start over again. And that was a very debilitating kind of movement.
Every city had its manufacturing specialty. Steel in Pittsburgh, cars in Detroit, cash registers in Dayton. These disappeared. The highways came in, the suburban malls developed. So the cities were kind of stripped.
But this didn't just happen in the United States. It happened all the way across Northern Europe as well.
Now, Prince Charles had gotten very interested in this whole idea because it was part of his mission in the UK to kind of start to spread the economic benefits around and deal with social issues.
This speech made headlines around the world, and it resonated very powerfully with us. He had accused the British architects of flocking to London because that's where the big commissions were, and leaving the northern cities, which really needed architecture more than anybody, without the service of big professionals. He asked whether he could meet with a group of people from RUDAT to talk about our techniques for getting citizens involved in determining the future of their communities.
There was an interest in bringing people together from the United States and the UK, and of course this was David Lewis's particular pet project to do so.
It took us a good 2 years to put it all together. The conference was held here in Pittsburgh because this was an industrial city that had been very seriously affected by the downturn of industry.
There was great concern about what the economy was going to be of the future if steel was gone. This is Steel City, after all.
It was preceded by the RUDAT team working for 5 days on the Monongahela Valley. And of course on the whole question mark of what will Pittsburgh be.
The idea of doing the RUDAT here was that we would have a case study that everybody could look at. Here were communities that had been devastated by the downfall of steel. We had every kind of problem that you can imagine.
And Prince Charles actually went down to Homestead and visited school kids and workers and local officials.
And it's hard to underestimate the contrast between the Prince of Wales and the Mon Valley as it was at that point. That was the point of it. So this is important on the world stage. It's not a forgotten place.
And so it was a great conference. We had the world's press because the Prince of Wales was there. We'd been on every television station. We'd been in every newspaper. The conference was successful in that way. I mean, it came out with many prescriptions, like leaving a doctor's office and you've got a prescription, you go down to the pharmacy, but you haven't cured your ill. The big lesson I think that we all learned was that we have a hell of a long way to go.
I think of his personality as an artistic personality. A city is an art form. We need to get the design template right, and David has given us that design template of how to build a dense, interactive, sustainable, diverse, and creative city. If Jane Jacobs helped us understand the social fabric of cities, David is equal or more in understanding the design fabric of cities. David is one of the mega giants in our field.
And so my message to the younger generation of architects is to drop the capital A in front of architect and become, first of all, a human being whose language is architecture. But you're first a human being and a citizen. Forget your labels, leave them at the door. Come in and join a team. And as a team, work with citizens to resolve the most urgent problems in our society. And most of all, to enfranchise the unenfranchised and the disenfranchised, which are the poor people and the old people and the people who are swept to one side. And that's, I think, the primary role of architects.